Hello, so today we will analyze another classical game. This one's by Nidorf and Gligoric. Gligoric is playing with the black pieces, Nidorf is playing with white here. Uh, Nidorf is the one who invented the Nidorf variation of the Sicilian. Uh, I think it was this. I think this is the Nidorf. A6. I think it's something like that. Maybe not right now. But he invented the Nidorf, D4, and he plays D4. We get knight F6 and C4. We get G6 here. It is known as the King's Indian defense. We get knight to C3, bishop to G7, E4, and D6. We get a knight to F3, and here we get castles. We have bishop to E2. We get E5, one of the usual pawn breaks in the King's Indian here. And here we get castles. We get knight to c6, d5, knight to e7, and knight to e1. The knight will usually go here, and then f3, the bishop will go here on e3, and then drop to f2. That's one of the plans for white here. And they're also going to expand in the queen side at some point with a3, b4, c5, b5, a4, stuff like that. And they're gonna try to they're gonna try to break through with the through the queen side, and in the king's Indian, you break through in the king side with f5, and you're gonna start an attack on the king. So that's the plan for both colors here. We get knight to d7 here, potentially putting the knight here, opening up the possibility for f5, and after this move, we get knight to d3 immediately, just controlling the square over here and just developing the knight. We get f5, f3, and f4. The idea of f4 being to limit the bishop. I think f4 limits the bishop here. You can take, but that's not good. And here we get bishop to e2 developing, and d2 developing the bishop. After that, we get knight to f6, putting the knight here to open up the bishop. We get b4 and g5. So as you can see, black is starting attacking the king side, white is trying to use the pawns in the queen side here to open it up. We get c5 and h5. We get knight g2, knight f2, bringing the knight to the king's defense here, and we get knight to g6, bringing a knight closer to the king here for an attack. We get rook c1, putting a rook on the c file that is about to open, and we get rook to f7. We had c takes d6, c takes d6, and a4. And the idea of rook to f7 was to go bishop to f8. And bishop to f8, basically you protect this pawn here, and you're going to open up rook h7, rook g, or rook g7 ideas here to play for g4. And this bishop isn't going to do anything other than defend this. And here we get a5, just pushing in the queen side. And here we get rook g7, and here we get a3. After h3. After h3, you can pause the video here to find the move for black. So if you pause the video, it's knight to h8. This is a move, and the plan is simple. You want to go knight to f7 and then put it on h6. So what a nice maneuver here. Just putting the knight on h8 here. But the idea is to go to f7 and then h6 and then play g4. Because black is trying to start an attack on the king side. And after this, we get the move knight to b5, pressuring this, and also preventing knight to f7 from happening. Because if you play knight to f7 now, which is a big mistake, now there's knight to c7, and after you move the rook, then the knight will go to e6. And hits the rook, hits the queen, and the bishop, so bishop takes is forced. And after e takes, knight to h6, even though this pawn is weak, like let's say play a random move, even if you do manage to go here, there's the queen going there, and then the bishop, and the black's pieces here are just very passive. So instead of knight to f7, here we get g4 immediately, a pawn sacrifice here. We get white accepts the pawn sacrifice after f takes, h takes, and h takes g4. After this move, we get a6 kicking out the knight. Again, if you go knight to f7, it's the same continuation with knight to c7. We get a6 here, kicking the knight out so that the knight can't go here anymore. The knight goes to a3. If the knight goes to c3, then you can pause the video again to find the very strong move for black here. Now the idea of white here is to go to a4 and then go to b6. So you're gonna try to find the move to prevent that. So if you pause the video, it's b5. b5 stops the knight from going here to a4. And now if takes, after takes, and then the queen gets access to this very open diagonal here, and there's an open h file, and the king is very unsafe here. So black is gonna get a very huge attack here. That's why you get knight to a3 instead, maybe with an idea of going to c4 here, pressure this, and then try to go to b6. So black plays bishop to d7 here, so that he doesn't have to lose the bishop, like let's say knight to f7 here, and like here. Black doesn't want to lose his bishop here because after the rook moves, let's say takes. Here, white is clearly better because they have two bishops and they're currently up a pawn here, and black's pieces are just too passive to start an attack here. So we get bishop d7 here, so he's trying to save the bishop here, maybe putting it on b5 in the future. We get knight to c4 and just rook c8, putting the rook there. We get knight b6, and now we get a trade of rooks and bishop takes c1. After this move, we get bishop to e8, putting the bishop here, maybe trying to go to g6 in the future, and still keeping an eye on b5. We get bishop to a3. Now the idea of bishop a3 is the queen moves, and then the rook can go here on the c file, and then there's going to be b5 things in the future here, and the idea is to open up the diagonal for the bishops, and the rook will control the c file. So that's white's idea with bishop to a3. We get knight to f7, trying to continue the attack in the king side. We get queen to c2 here, putting the queen on the c file, and knight to h6. And here we get g5, which is a tricky move. Now, rook if the another move is rook c1, but this is losing due to knight takes h4. And if you try to go for queen, wait, no, not right now. Knight takes. If you try to go for queen to c8 now, then there's a very strong move, queen to h4. And basically, if you hadn't gone queen to h4, you'd be in a worse position here because of your pawn structure. You want to keep the queens because you're attacking here, and so the queen is attacking the knight and starting to trade. But queen to h4, sacrificing a bishop. You cannot take the bishop because then there's a queen to f2 check here. King is forced to move to the h file, and this is going to be mate. And if you take, then after rook takes here, uh, f3 is coming here. If you take this, just go f3. And yeah, you have queen to e6 check, but king simply goes to h8, and there's nothing. Because rook takes is a very strong threat. Uh, After something like rook to c2, there's just queen to e1, king has to go here, and then rook h4, queen blocks, takes, and additionally you're queening a second time. So that's why you can't go for a trading plan here with rook c1 and then queen to c8. So plays g5 with an idea that after takes here, go into the same variation with takes. Now the idea is that after the queen goes to c8, there's suddenly no queen to h4 because the rook is on g5. So you can't go there. And that is the idea of white with a very tricky move of g5. Of course, black has to take, otherwise they're gonna lose a knight. And after rook c1, here Black plays rook to g3 here, with tempo attacking the bishop here, and you can't play queen to c8 because then after takes here, you lose the bishop. So you can't go for a queen trade immediately. And after bishop to b2, here knight fg4, bringing pieces to the attack. We get knight takes g4, knight takes g4, and bishop takes g4, and rook takes g4, and if you go queen to c8, we just end up in the exact same position. After queen takes, it's the same thing. Wait, no, not there. Here, and rook c2, it's the same thing after this check. So instead, white plays queen to f2, uh, defending the king, trying to defend the king here. And here we get bishop to g6 here, pressuring the weak pawn on e4. And black is clearly better here because of the massive attack on the king here. The king is pretty weak here. You can't say the same for black's king because there's way too much pieces defending it. Two bishops, queen and rook, and they're attacking at the same time. And additionally, this pawn's hanging, and that the g2 pawn is weak. After that, we get rook to c4, defending the e4 pawn, and here we just get queen to e7 here. Idea of putting the queen on h7, and then maybe putting the rook there, and then giving a check, and then just winning the game. We have bishop to c3 here, uh, defending this pawn, I guess, with an idea to bring the bishop to e1 and add more defenders to the king. We get queen to h7 here. Continuing with the plan, we get queen to e2, attacking the rook, and here we just get rook h4 here, and we're now the rook is infiltrating through h1. We get king to g2, and here we get a very nice move f3, and you cannot take this with the queen because then there's a pin with the rook on f4. And you can't take it with the pawn because there's a skewer. And if you take it with the king, just bishop to h5. Yeah, bishop to h5 here, and you win the queen through another skewer. So you cannot take the pawn at all. So we get queen to e3. After queen to e3, we just get rook f4 anyway, to try and take this and open up everything. We get g takes f3 and just queen h2, and this king is gonna get checkmated. We had king to e1, queen to h1, king to e2, and here we just get bishop to h5, and there's a lot of pressure, and you cannot defend the f3 pawn. We get king to d2 and just rook takes f3, and the king is getting mated soon. We had queen to g5, trying to give a couple of checks, but after bishop to g7, there's no checks after something like queen to d8. Simply just king to h7 here, or rook c8, still king to h7 here, and there's no more checks. Here we get the move king to c2, and here just rook f2 check. And wherever you go, you're getting mated here. If the king goes to b3, it's immediately checkmate like this, with a queen to b3, queen to b1, and then queen to a2 check. And if you go here, then they're still made like this. And then after something like bishop to d2, there's rook to f3 check, and you have to block with the queen, and then rook takes e3, king takes, and queen f3 is a checkmate. So the bishop has to block, but then queen to d1 check comes in, and you're gonna win this bishop eventually. We had king to c3, trying to hold on to the bishop, but then queen to a1 check comes in, and white is going to get mated. They played the move king to c2, but then just bishop to d1 check, bringing the bishop. And after king to d3, black resigns after queen to b1 check. Because of king to e3, then there's rook to f3 check. If the rook blocks, then it's just going to be made anyway. And if the king goes here, then queen to c2 is made. So definitely a nice game by Gligoric because of that knight maneuver from the knight g6 here. The knight goes to h8, then to f7, then to h6. So a whole maneuver there just to get a knight to that square right beside g6. And it takes 3 moves. But with a knight there, g4 is possible. And then and then black's attack was successful here. And that is the end of the video. And bye.